Kill them. Kill every last one of them.
The enemy commander's voice was ice cold. There was no rage, no hesitation, just a man ordering a massacre with the casual indifference of ordering a meal. He pressed his boot into the back of a wounded American soldier's neck, ground his face into the dirt, and raised his hand. Behind him, dozens of rifles lifted in perfect, terrifying unison. The 28 men of Alpha Platoon had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and absolutely nothing left between them and death. Sergeant Vance Calder screamed for a sniper. No one answered. Then, from the very back of the line, the sharp crack of a hard-shell case unlatching pierced the chaos. The morning began the way the worst days always do, in absolute, deceptive quiet. There was no warning shot, no distant thunder rolling in to tell the men of Alpha Platoon what was coming. It was only a sunrise over the ridgeline that looked almost peaceful, orange and red, bleeding into a dust-colored sky above Ember Ridge. And then, nothing was peaceful anymore. The first artillery round decimated the eastern perimeter. It didn't just hit, it erased. One moment, Corporal Mateo Cruz was crouched behind a concrete barrier, checking his sidearm and making a joke about powdered eggs. A heartbeat later, the barrier was reduced to rubble, and Mateo was on his back, thrown through the air, his ears ringing so fiercely it felt as though the entire world had been dragged underwater. Sergeant Vance Calder hit the earth before the second round even landed. Years of relentless service had hardwired his body to react before his brain could process the threat. He didn't decide to drop. He just became small, pressing his face into the dirt, flattening out the way soldiers learn to do when the sky starts falling. Contact east perimeter. Contact east. His voice cut through the ringing. Get down! Get down! The radio on his hip crackled alive with screaming voices. Sergeant, this is Foxtrot 2. We've got movement on the north slope. Infantry. At least a full company. How many? Calder snapped. A heavy pause. A lot, Sergeant. A lot. He low-crawled to the edge of the collapsed barrier and peered over. What he saw hit him harder than the artillery strike. 3 enemy platoons were moving in a coordinated, sweeping advance down the north face of Ember Ridge. Roughly 100 men moving in staggered lines, covering and moving the kind of professional, lethal coordination that didn't belong to irregular fighters. These men were heavily trained, and their weapons were pointed directly at 28 bleeding, battered American soldiers. Calder did the math instantly. 3-to-1 odds at minimum. Foxtrot 2, fall back to the secondary line. Everybody secondary line now. He scrambled back through the smoke, physically grabbing his men by their gear, pulling them up and shoving them forward toward the reinforced interior. The world around him had dissolved into pure, deafening noise. The snap of incoming fire, the frantic crackle of return fire, the deep, terrifying thumps of mortar rounds dropping closer and closer. Private Gallagher, a young kid from somewhere in Ohio, was sitting against a wall, his hands pressed tightly to his thigh. He wasn't screaming. He was just sitting there, eyes terrifyingly wide, staring down at his blood-soaked hands, as if he didn't quite understand what was happening to them. Medic Calder roared. Medic on Gallagher. Corporal Elena Rossi slid in beside the boy without needing to be told twice, immediately ripping into her trauma kit. She was good at her job. Calder kept moving. The secondary line was a cluster of reinforced positions near an old stone watchtower at the center of the ridge. It was a structure that had stood for decades, thick and solid, its surface now pocked with both ancient bullet scars and fresh ones. Calder had 26 functional soldiers left by the time he reached it. 2 were already down. He grabbed the radio. Ember Base, this is Alpha Actual. We are under sustained contact east and north. Enemy strength approximately company plus. We have casualties. Requesting immediate fire support and QRF. How copy? Static. A burst of interference. And then the voice he prayed he wouldn't hear delivering the words that meant certain death. Alpha Actual, Ember Base. QRF is committed to Firebase Kilo. Fire support unavailable. Enemy has painted the grid. Any artillery will endanger your position. You are directed to hold current position. Help is coming. The estimated wait time crackled over the radio. It was a duration so long it might as well have been a lifetime. Calder looked at his remaining 26 soldiers. He looked at the enemy formations closing in. He looked at the exposed killing field in every direction.
All right, Calder said, forcing a steadiness into his voice that he did not feel. We hold what we've got. Everyone find a position. Conserve ammunition. Shoot what you can hit and nothing you can't.
Staff Sergeant Rollins materialized at his side. Vance, they've got a machine gun nest set up on that outcropping. If they start walking that thing across our line, we're dead.
I see it. We need a sniper.
Calder desperately scanned his surviving platoon. Infantrymen, support specialists, 2 medics, a comms sergeant, a vehicle crew chief. And then, for reasons he couldn't explain, his eyes landed on her. She had been assigned to Alpha Platoon recently, a lateral transfer from a logistics unit, presumably someone's paperwork mistake. She was a quiet woman who had spent her time doing exactly what she was told, fading perfectly into the background. She ate quietly. She cleaned her weapon without being asked. She answered only when spoken to. Private Clara Hayes. He had barely learned her name, but desperate men ask desperate questions.
Any snipers here? Calder shouted over the gunfire. Anybody? Any training? Any qualification? Speak up now!
Silence from his left. Silence from his right. Rollins offered a grim shake of his head. From the 24 other soldiers crouched in cover, not a single voice rose. And then from the very back of the position, from the darkest corner, where the quiet logistics clerk had been keeping her head down, a sound. Not a voice, not words, the heavy metallic sound of a case unlatching. Calder turned. Clara Hayes was on one knee. She had pulled a hard-shell tactical case from beneath the rubble. How it had survived the artillery, how she knew exactly where it was, neither question mattered right now. Her hands were moving across the latches with a blind certainty that only comes from countless hours of repetition. She threw the case open. Inside, broken down into its lethal components, was a Barrett M107 long-range anti-materiel rifle. It was the kind of weapon that did not belong to a supply clerk. It was the kind of weapon that belonged to a very specific, very rare breed of soldier. The entire platoon went completely quiet. Even the radio seemed to hold its breath. The only sounds left in the world were the distant crack of enemy rifles and the smooth scrape of metal as Clara began assembling the massive rifle with terrifyingly practiced hands. Calder walked toward her, stopping just feet away. He watched the stock receiver and barrel lock into place with definitive metallic clicks. No hesitation, no fumbling. Her movements were brutally efficient. And frankly, a little frightening.
Hayes, he breathed.
Sergeant,
she replied, not looking up.
Where did that come from?
Supply manifest.
Section 4. Emergencies weapons cache, she said, sliding the heavy bolt into position. It's been logged in the inventory for months. No one ever checked.
And you know how to use it.
She looked up at him then. Her brown eyes were impossibly calm. It wasn't the artificial calm of someone pretending not to be terrified. It was the chilling calm of a person who had already done the math and made their peace with death.
I've used it before, she said.
That was all she offered. She attached a Night Force optic, non-standard issue, the kind a shooter acquires personally, and rose from her knee in one fluid motion. Without asking for a position, she moved to a broken section of the wall and set up.
Calder crouched beside her.
Machine gun nest, outcropping at 11 o'clock. They start working that gun, we lose the left flank.
Clara was already looking through the scope.
I see them. 2 men on the gun, 1 spotter to the right. She paused. Wind is shifting left to right. Ground temperature is rising. There will be a mirage layer shortly that will affect my reads. I want to take the shot before that happens.
Calder stared at her. Take the shot.
Clara exhaled. Her body went entirely still in a way human bodies simply aren't meant to be still. No micro movements. Total, absolute physical control. Her trigger finger rested against the guard, and with a single, measured exhale, she squeezed.
The Barrett spoke. The sound was enormous, a flat, heavy crack that seemed to compress the very air around them. It didn't just echo, it shoved. Every soldier in Alpha Platoon flinched. Far across the expanse, the enemy machine gun went permanently silent.
Calder's radio immediately lit up. "Sergeant, left flank. The machine gun stopped. Did we—"
"Stand by," Calder interrupted, his eyes locked on Clara. She had already chambered the next massive round and was scanning the ridgeline. Spotter relocated behind the secondary rock formation. She murmured, sounding as calm as a teacher reading a textbook. "I have him."
A second deafening shot. The radio crackled again. "Sergeant, someone is lighting up that outcropping. What is?"
"That's us," Calder said into the comms, his voice laced with a sudden, profound awe. "That's ours. Hold your line and let her work." He hadn't planned to phrase it that way, but the words were undeniable. Her, the quiet supply clerk. Calder turned to look at his platoon. Most of them were staring at the spot where the machine gun had been. A few turned to look at Clara. He watched the shift happen in real time across their dirt-streaked faces, from total confusion to staggering disbelief, and finally to the fragile, glowing ember of hope.
Diego Navarro, a young soldier who had been pale as a ghost since the artillery dropped, finally exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding forever.
"Who is she?"
Diego whispered. Nobody answered because nobody knew. The shadow line. What followed was the most educational experience of Sergeant Vance Calder's military career. He respected snipers, but what Clara Hayes did was something entirely different. She didn't just shoot. She managed the battlefield. The enemy was pushing a textbook envelopment maneuver meant to crush the platoon from 3 sides. Clara reached out and violently interfered with their timing. She identified the flanking elements as the greater threat, ignoring the instinctive urge to shoot the main body. Her first rounds shattered the western flank, then tracked to the eastern group, surgically removing their comm soldier. She identified targets not by rank, but by the equipment on their backs. Vance watched through his binoculars. Both flanking forces froze, their lethal momentum destroyed. They were terrified, confused, hunting for the source of the devastation. Clara had bought them precious time, and she used it to systematically dismantle the center line.
"She's managing them," Rollins whispered, kneeling beside Calder. "She's keeping all 3 elements off balance."
"I see that, Rollins," Clara spoke without taking her eye off the glass. "Sergeant, they're pushing a mortar team forward. If they set up, they'll bracket us. They're moving through the underbrush on the southeast corner."
Calder squinted. He couldn't see anything but dense trees. "Can you reach it?"
"It's beyond optimal effective range for this rifle at this angle," she said. A pause. "I can still hit it." Calder looked at her. How confident. She didn't answer immediately. A silence Calder was already learning to read as her version of absolute certainty. Confident enough, she fired. Far away, hidden deep in the tree line, there was the distinct mechanical clatter of a heavy mortar tube toppling over and violently striking rock, followed by panicked shouting. Diego Navarro let out a sound halfway between a hysterical laugh and a sob. "She just shot a mortar. Through the trees," he gasped. "Did that just happen?" Calder's hands were shaking, but not from fear.
It was the electrifying sensation of suddenly finding himself on the winning side of an impossible scenario. "You're going to tell me something," Calder said to Clara during a brief, eerie lull in the fighting. She methodically checked her ammunition. "What do you want to know?"
Everything.
"Let's start with how a supply clerk makes a shot through dense tree cover with a rifle that costs more than my truck."
"The rifle is mine," she replied quietly. "Personal equipment."
"That rifle is not personal equipment."
She seated the heavy magazine.
"The logistics assignment was cover. I was between assignments."
"Cover for what?" She finally looked at him, her dark eyes possessing the same oceanic depth and terrifying stillness as before.
"Shadow line."
The words landed like a physical blow.
Calder had heard of Shadow Line. Everyone had. It was a phantom program spoken of in hushed whispers and dismissed as rumor because the reality of such a Black Ops interdiction unit was too unsettling to think about.
"Shadow Line was disbanded," Calder said.
"Units are disbanded," Clara replied smoothly. "Training isn't."
Calder stared at her. The sheer absurdity of it. A lethal operator eating powdered eggs beside his youngest recruits filling out inventory forms.
"Why didn't you say something when we got here?"
"Because I am not supposed to exist," she said, her voice entirely void of ego.
"We don't raise our hands. We don't volunteer our profiles to commanders who might misuse assets they don't officially have." A slight pause. "And because I was tired. I wanted to carry boxes for a while. I wanted a job where the math was simple, where I could see exactly what I'd accomplished at the end of the day. Instead, I ended up here."
Calder sat with the weight of that truth.
"I'm glad you did."
The tower.
The enemy adapted. Armored personnel carriers, APCs, rolled up to support the infantry. Clara instantly pivoted, targeting the forward artillery observer directing the armor. Instead of shooting the man, she shattered the tiny radio antenna on his back, rendering the armor utterly blind and stalling their advance.
But the enemy wasn't going to stop.
"They're going to hit us again," Rollins warned. "And the watchtower. If someone gets up there, they'll have eyes on the entire field."
Calder looked at the crumbling stone structure.
Half of it had been blown away. It was a total death trap. He turned to Clara. "No, I'm not sending you up there alone."
"You're not sending me anywhere,"
she corrected him softly, stating a pure fact. "That position gives me clear sight lines. I can hold that space for your platoon while you consolidate. Someone has to do it."
Calder hated that she was right.
"Radio stays on. The second that structure starts to fail, you get out."
Clara nodded, a subtle shift in her eyes, acknowledging that he was demanding she survive.
She slung the heavy Barrett across her back and began the treacherous climb.
From the broken parapet high above, Clara commanded the battlefield. Through the Night Force optic, the war became a dark, magnified puzzle. She spotted the enemy's counter-sniper, a massive distance away, dug deep into a ridge. He was waiting for her. He knew she was in the tower.
"He's anticipating me," Clara radioed. "I'm going to let him think he has me. I need him to commit to the shot so he can't redirect."
"You're using yourself as bait," Calder demanded over the comms.
"I've done this before, Sergeant."
She shifted her body just enough to expose her silhouette.
Far across the valley, the enemy sniper took the bait. His bullet impacted the stone mere inches from Clara's face, showering her with razor-sharp rock chips. But in the fraction of a moment between his trigger pull and the impact, Clara had already rolled, aimed, and fired.
The enemy sniper did not shoot again.
Below her, Alpha Platoon roared to life, fighting with a renewed, ferocious cohesion. Clara was no longer just a shooter. She was their axis. Every time a major threat emerged, a heavy gunner, an anti-tank team, a flanking squad, Clara systematically erased them from the board.
But her ammunition was dwindling. She keyed her radio.
"Sergeant, I am down to 12 rounds."
A heavy silence followed.
12 rounds against a reinforced company. They're adapting, Clara warned. I need your platoon to lay down maximum suppressive fire. Make it look like I'm directing it from the ground. I need to reposition outside our defensive line.
That is completely exposed, Hayes. We can't cover you out there.
If I stay in the tower, I'm predictable. Give me cover fire. I'm going.
Calder gave the order. The platoon erupted into a deafening wall of lead. Clara moved like a ghost, sprinting low and fast through the open ground, diving behind a pile of collapsed masonry. She found her new angles just as the enemy launched their most aggressive assault yet, a desperate, all-out push.
She used her precious remaining rounds to blind the enemy armor, shooting the periscopes out of the APCs. She surgically eliminated their command coordinators. With every trigger pull, her left shoulder screamed in agony. A deep, tearing muscular trauma was spreading through her arm, but she cataloged the pain as mere data and kept working. Suddenly, a massive groan echoed across the valley.
Clara looked back just in time to see the stone watchtower, the position she had occupied moments before, catastrophically collapse into a mountain of dust and rubble.
The final stand. With only a handful of rounds left, Clara spotted a heavy enemy machine gun pinning down her men. She had no angle from her cover. Without hesitation, she broke from her position, running through completely open ground to find a sightline. She dropped, fired her last functional long-distance shot, and silenced the gun.
She dove back into the safety of Alpha's perimeter, crashing into the dirt. Corporal Rossi was on her instantly, ripping away her gear to expose the torn, bruised flesh of her shoulder. Diego Navarro hovered over her, his young face a messy painting of exhaustion and awe. "You came back," he breathed.
"I said I would," Clara rasped.
Calder slid in beside her, his eyes scanning her empty rifle and ruined shoulder. "You're empty."
"Yes."
"And the shoulder?"
"Still attached, but no longer cooperating." Calder looked at her, his voice dropping its command authority, softening into something deeply human.
"Stay down, Clara. You have given everything there is to give. Let us finish this."
But the war wasn't done. The enemy made one final brutal surge.
Rollins screamed for ammunition for his heavy machine gun. Bennett grabbed the ammo cans and sprinted across the gap, but heavy enemy fire pinned him down midway. If the gun went silent, the platoon would be overrun.
Clara had one single bullet left. She did the math. If she shot the enemy pinning Bennett, he could move, but she would be entirely defenseless. She keyed her radio.
"Sergeant, I'm getting that ammo." She fired her final round into the enemy position, scattering their fire. Then she dropped her empty sniper rifle, ignored her destroyed shoulder, and sprinted into the kill zone. She grabbed Bennett by his webbing, hauled him to his feet, grabbed an ammo can, and dragged them both through the relentless gunfire to the machine gun nest.
She collapsed against the wall, her body finally giving out. The gun roared back to life. The line held.
And then the beautiful thundering sound of Apache attack helicopters split the sky.
Eagle 1 had arrived. Hellfire missiles and heavy cannons rained down, utterly disintegrating the remaining enemy forces. The silence that followed was so sudden, so absolute, it felt violently disorienting. Calder lowered his radio. He looked at Clara. "We're clear." Clara looked up at the sky, her chest heaving. 27, she whispered. Calder closed his eyes. Julian Castillo hadn't made it. 27, he confirmed. Her duty done, Clara's body finally surrendered. She slumped sideways, completely unconscious before she hit the ground. Diego Navarro watched her fall, a reverent smile touching his exhausted face. "Clara, from nowhere," he whispered. The accounting. Days later, in a sterile military hospital in Germany, Calder sat beside Clara's bed. Her shoulder had been surgically repaired. A man with no insignia, A man named Holden had just left the room, having offered Clara full reactivation into a newly reformed shadow line.
What did he offer? Calder asked.
Clara stared out the hospital window. They're rebuilding the program. They promised safeguards, accountability. She finally told Calder the truth about why she had quit. Her former spotter, a brilliant young man named Dominic Reyes, had been killed because a commander prioritized a schedule over intelligence warnings. She had filed the reports. The military had buried them. Dominic had an infant daughter who would never know him. I told Holden that Dominic's story needs to be the foundation of their new training protocols, Clara said quietly. His name needs to be on the record. And what are you going to do? Calder asked. Clara looked down at her sling. I'm going to do my physical therapy, and then I'm going to make a decision I can live with. Before she transferred back to the States, the men of Alpha Platoon came to visit her. Gallagher came on crutches, stammering out his profound gratitude. Diego Navarro brought her a simple bottle of water, an echo of the battlefield, and talked to her about his family in Texas. And Calder came, one last time, to say goodbye. "Any snipers here?" he quoted softly, holding out his hand. Clara took it. "I was always here," she said, passing the torch. Months later, Clara Hayes stood at the front of a quiet classroom at Fort Harrison. 12 elite sniper recruits sat before her, backs straight, eyes alert. She walked to the whiteboard and wrote a single sentence. A bullet travels faster than regret, but regret travels farther. She turned to face them. My name is Clara Hayes. I was a shadow line operator. Recently, I was on a ridge where 27 soldiers survived an ambush that should have killed all 28 of us. The room was dead silent. One didn't make it. His name was Julian Castillo. I carry his memory every single day. And if you make it through my program, you will understand exactly why carrying that weight is not a burden. It is the entire point of doing this job right. Over the next few weeks, Clara molded them. She recognized the arrogance in Brooks Mercer and slowly broke it down into true accuracy. She saw the quiet, brilliant observer potential in Silas Park, realizing he had the same rare gift Dominic had possessed. When Harper Lynn struggled with the guilt of a past command failure, Clara counseled her through it, using her own scars as the textbook. But war rarely stays in the past. A classified message arrived from Holden. Intelligence had located the enemy commander who had ordered the massacre at Ember Ridge, the man who had put his boot on an American's neck and laughed. Shadowline needed her specific profile to hunt him down, and they needed her immediately. Clara took the file to Calder, who was now stationed at the training command. You built this course to produce people who can hold the line without you, Calder told her softly. If Silas Park can't lead the final weeks of this class, then the course didn't work. Clara knew he was right. She found Silas later that afternoon. I have to leave, she told him. There is a line that needs holding. You are going to finish teaching this cohort. Silas didn't flinch. He looked at her with the quiet gravity of a soldier who fully understands the weight of the torch being passed. I will try to be enough, he promised. It is enough, Clara replied. The morning she left the base, she stood outside the classroom window one last time. She watched Silas writing on the whiteboard, taking command of the room, passing the heavy, vital truth forward to the next generation. It was a beautiful sight, the legacy Dominic Reyes should have had living on through the recruits. Clara walked to her vehicle. She loaded the massive Barrett onto the passenger seat, her hands tracing the cold metal with the familiar affection of an old friend. She checked her gear. Her shoulder was fully healed. Her mind was absolute. She wasn't just a weapon or a ghost in the system or a broken soldier hiding in a supply room. She was an operator. She was a woman who held the line.
She put the vehicle in drive and headed toward the horizon.
She was ready. She had always been ready.